Chapter 6 Stampede. The buffalo were not only coming, they were thundering over the plains, heading for the river. If they crossed, they'd come ashore on top of the abbot's camp. The cattle were already fretting, stomping the dirt. The oxen tugged at their yokes. They don't want to get smashed by the stampeding buffalo. Amelia, Sam called. He found her playing with a pan of bread dough. Ma had set out to rise. Sam scooped her up in his arms and called to Lizzie, who was piling buffalo chips for the fire. Leave that and come to the wagon, Pa says. There's buffalo coming. It's not like they're just going to see it. They could die from this buffalo, so it's very scary and intense. Pa and the other men drew the wagons and livestock together. They hurried the women and children into the wagons, then took their guns and ducked behind some rocks to wait. Ma held baby Isaac close in one arm and circled the other tightly around Amelia. Ranger stayed close to her, too. Lizzie leaned out the tailgate. Won't they stop at the river? Sam climbed over the trunks and barrels to look. The buffalo didn't stop. They stampeded over the open land, down to the riverbank, and plunged in, one after another. The water churned and frothed into a boiling mud stew as the animals crossed. Soon the first beasts were climbing ashore, barreling toward the camp. They sounded like a great whooshing wind, like a storm blowing through. But instead of rain, the air was full of dust. I can only imagine. I mean, we don't see stuff like this anymore. There's a picture of it. I mean, I've seen children stampede, and that's scary enough. Not you guys aren't even like 1,000-pound beasts. That's pretty scary. Oh, Lord, keep us safe, Ma whispered, and started humming her worry hymn. Pa and Mr. Harrigan fired their guns from behind the rocks, shooting into the stampede to try to scare the animals off their course. Pa's guidebook said that might work. If it didn't, Sam knew the whole camp could be destroyed. Henry and Ezra Beard stood side by side, firing into the herd, but the buffalo kept coming as if they were covered in armor. Sam watched from the wagon. His heart thumped along with all those pounding hooves in the dirt. Every time one of the men's guns exploded, Sam's breath caught in his throat. I can only imagine how scared they must be. Turn, turn, he willed the buffalo to change course. If they didn't, they'd stomp the wagons into splinters. Turn! Pa fired his rifle again and again. Not only that, all the people would be killed in the animals they needed, so their trip would be over and they would all pretty much die out there. Finally, one of the buffaloes stumbled and sank to the ground. The herd kept going, but the massive animals veered away from the blast of guns. So that didn't stop them from running, but the one on the ground made them turn their direction. Sam felt a hot breeze as they rushed past, trampling the dry grass. When the last of the herd had thundered off into the dust, Henry Beard let out a whoop. Pa and the other men jumped from the rocks. I mean, their adrenaline must have been pumping, so when it actually turned and went the other way, I bet they were super excited and relieved. They ran toward the buffalo they'd taken down. Sam climbed down from the wagon bed. He slapped his thighs. Come on, dog. Let's go see what they got. Take this to your father. Ma handed Pa's big hunting knife down to Sam. Be careful. Ranger leaped from the wagon and kept close to Sam. There had been so many huge animals. The air was still full of their smell. Ranger followed Sam up to the collapsed buffalo. Its legs were crumpled underneath its great body. Its fur was matted with dust and blood. Mr. Harrigan and some of the Gold Rush boys from Missouri turned the buffalo over to expose its soft belly. We'll eat well tonight, Pa said. You might think, ooh, buffalo meat, but it's a lot like cow's meat. So they were going to be able to have hamburgers and steak. And after they've been only eating bacon and flour, this is going to be a big treat for them. Mr. Harrigan and some of the Gold Rush boys from Missouri turned the buffalo over. I read that part. We'll eat well tonight, Pa said. He bent down to pat Ranger's head. You heard them coming, didn't you, dog? Good thing you let loose barking when you did. Sam handed Pa his knife, and Pa slit the buffalo's hide from its throat all the way to its tail. Sam had to turn away. But later, after the sun had set and campfire smoke rose up into the clouds, he breathed in the greasy goodness of buffalo steaks, sizzling over the fire. It was the first fresh meat they'd had since they set out from Independence. This is a little bit of heaven, Ma said as she bit into the steak. It's not very tender, Lizzie complained. But she ate every last bit of the sweet, dark meat on her tin plate. Sam finished his supper, too, and leaned back to look at the stars. He could hear the oxen and horses snorting and shuffling. It had taken them a while to settle down. He could hear Mr. Harrigan tuning his fiddle. He could hear Pa and the Beard brothers laughing as they told the story of bringing the buffalo down. Sam reached into his pocket and pulled out the quilt squares with the farmhouse and apple tree and Scout. What stories he'd have to write in his letter to everyone back home. Sam's belly was full and warm. His eyes were drooping when Sarah came running across the circle to their fire in tears. Can you help me find Dr. Loring? Find! Find! Ranger's ears perked up. Ma was already on her feet. I think he had supper with the Middletons. Is it your father, Sarah? Mr. Ferguson had been sick for 2 days now. Sarah nodded and let out a sob. And Ma, too, now. It's bad. Oh, please, come quick. Both her parents are sick. And sick, in that case, meant they could easily die, so this is really stressful for Sarah. So we'll have to see what happens to her parents, but that's the end of chapter 6, so you'll have to come back for chapter 7, a sad goodbye. Kind of foreshadows what's going to happen. When you read a title, it can tell you what might happen in the next chapter, so get your tissues ready for chapter 7.